The first time Claire Matthews met Ethan Cole, the sky was pouring as if it had something to prove. The kind of rain that blurred city lights into smeared watercolor streaks and soaked through every layer of clothing no matter how fast you ran. Claire had run anyway, her old umbrella flipping inside out halfway across the street, her worn sneakers splashing through puddles. She clutched her thin folder tight against her chest, though she knew the papers inside were already ruined. She was late, 15 minutes past the time written in the email she could hardly believe was real. The elevator ride to the top floor of Cole Industries was an agony of nerves and damp discomfort. By the time the doors opened, she was out of breath, hair plastered to her face, blouse clinging to her skin. She tried to compose herself before stepping into the reception area, but the sleek, glass-walled office looked like another world entirely, modern, quiet, and expensive enough that her shoes squeaked against the marble floor. The receptionist, perfectly composed in a navy suit, looked her over with the faintest flicker of confusion, before gesturing toward the double doors. "Mr. Cole is waiting for you," she said politely, her tone not quite hiding her disbelief. Claire swallowed hard and nodded, clutching her bag as she stepped into the lion's den. Ethan Cole sat behind a minimalist glass desk, the skyline of the city stretching out behind him in a mist of silver gray. His presence filled the room before he even spoke, a man who didn't need to raise his voice to be noticed. He wore a tailored black suit, his dark hair neatly combed back and his sharp blue eyes flicked up from his laptop the moment she entered. He didn't frown at her lateness. He didn't even seem surprised. He just looked at her, long enough for her to feel every drop of rain and every ounce of exhaustion on her skin. "Miss Matthews," he said finally, closing the laptop with a quiet click. "You made it." His voice was smooth, calm, but there was an undercurrent of authority in it that made her straighten instinctively. She set her soaked folder on the edge of the desk, mortified by the water spots spreading across the glass. "I'm so sorry," she blurted. "The bus broke down in the rain." He raised a hand slightly, stopping her. "It's fine. Please sit." She sat, clutching the strap of her bag like a lifeline. She couldn't figure out why she was here. The email had been brief, sent from the office of Cole Industries, one of the largest conglomerates in the country. She'd thought it was a scam at first, but curiosity and desperation had made her answer. She'd applied to dozens of jobs in the past few months, anything to cover her daughter's medical bills, but she couldn't remember sending anything here. Ethan leaned back in his chair, studying her. "You're probably wondering why you're here." "Yes, sir," she admitted. "I wasn't told much." He nodded once, then steepled his fingers. "This is not a standard job offer. I need to make that clear before we go any further." Her heart stuttered. "Then what kind of offer is it?" He paused as if choosing his words carefully. "A personal one. My company's board of directors has certain expectations of me. They believe that as the face of a family-oriented corporation, I should reflect those values personally. In short, they want me to settle down." Claire blinked. "Settle down? You mean get married," he said flatly. "Or at least appear to be." Her mouth went dry. She almost laughed, thinking he was joking, but there was no humor in his eyes. "I'm sorry, what?" "I need someone to play the role of my fiancée for 6 months," he continued calmly, as if he were discussing a merger instead of proposing the strangest arrangement she'd ever heard. "After that, the contract will end. You'll receive $1 million in compensation." The words hung in the air, absurd and heavy all at once. Claire felt her breath catch in her throat. $1 million for 6 months of pretending? It sounded like a fantasy or a trap. She stared at him, searching his face for any hint of deceit. "Why me?" He looked down briefly, then back at her with that unreadable expression again. "Because you're unconnected. You don't move in my circles. You're not a socialite or a celebrity. You have no reason to betray me and no one would suspect you of ulterior motives. She felt her cheeks burn. You mean because I'm ordinary? I mean because you're real, he said simply. The word lodged somewhere deep inside her. For a long moment, the office was silent except for the soft hum of the rain against the windows. She tried to make sense of it all. This was insane. Completely insane. But then she thought of Lily. Her 6-year-old daughter lying in bed at home, her small chest rising and falling unevenly as she slept. The hospital bills that piled higher every week. The second job at the diner that barely kept the lights on. What exactly would I have to do? Claire asked slowly, her voice quieter now. Attend events with me. Charity galas, company dinners, media appearances. There will be photographers, interviews, and certain expectations. Nothing inappropriate, he added quickly as if sensing her hesitation. It's purely a business arrangement, she hesitated. And people will believe it? That's the idea, he said, his lips curving faintly. We'll stage an engagement, play the part of a couple in love. My PR team will handle the narrative. You'll be compensated monthly with the balance upon completion. She nodded slowly, her heart thudding in her chest. And if I say no? Then I'll find someone else, he said simply, though his gaze lingered on her in a way that made it feel like he already knew her answer. She bit her lip. The offer sounded impossible. Almost dangerous, but she couldn't ignore what that money could do. It could pay for Lily's treatment. It could buy them a future. She'd spent years fighting to survive on her own. Maybe this once she could stop fighting. Ethan reached into a drawer and placed a thick folder on the desk between them. This is the contract. It outlines the terms in full detail. You're welcome to review it with an attorney before signing. Claire picked it up, the weight of the paper startling in her hands. She flipped through it quickly, her eyes skimming lines of legal jargon she didn't understand. She caught phrases like confidentiality, mutual consent, and termination conditions, but most of it blurred together. At the end, there was a final page labeled Clause 17, Continuity of Agreement. She frowned at the unfamiliar legal phrasing, but didn't dwell on it. Her head was spinning too fast. Ethan's assistant reappeared then, holding a pen. If you decide to accept, sign here, Ethan said, his tone even. If not, no harm done. Claire stared at the pen. Her instincts screamed to walk away. But another voice, smaller and more desperate, whispered louder. It was Lily's voice asking when she could go back to school. When she could run again without pain. Her fingers trembled as she signed her name on the final line. Ethan reached forward and took the folder, his expression unreadable. Welcome to the arrangement, Miss Matthews, he said quietly. Our first public appearance is next week. My driver will pick you up. She nodded, standing on shaky legs. I'll be ready. As she turned to leave, he spoke again, softer this time. You don't have to thank me. Just remember what you signed. The elevator doors closed behind her with a hiss, and for the first time, Claire realized she hadn't once seen him smile. Not even when she agreed. Something about that unsettled her more than anything else. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the city still shimmered with its residue. Claire pulled her jacket tighter around her and walked to the bus stop, the contract still in her bag, the ink of her signature barely dry. The number 1 million echoed in her head like a promise and a warning all at once. She told herself she'd read it again later, line by line, when her head was clearer. She'd make sure everything was safe, that there were no surprises. But as she looked out the window of the bus, watching the lights blur past, she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd just stepped into something far bigger than she could imagine. And somewhere behind the walls of his glass office, Ethan Cole stood by the window, watching the rain start to fall again. His reflection dark against the skyline. He had gotten what he needed, a believable fiancée. But as his gaze lingered on the city streets below, his expression hardened. There was more to this contract than she knew, more than even he could protect her from. Clause 17 waited silently in the pages she hadn't read, and it would change both their lives before the 6 months were over. The engagement began as an illusion so carefully constructed it almost felt real. Claire found herself swept into a world she had only ever glimpsed through the faint glow of television screens and magazine covers. There were fittings for designer dresses, makeup artists with practiced smiles, and photographers who directed her every pose beside Ethan. She learned to smile when the flashbulbs burst, to lean just close enough to appear in love, and to hold Ethan's hand like she had known him her whole life. At first every moment felt foreign, every word rehearsed, every look a performance, but the longer she played the role, the more difficult it became to remember where the lie ended and the truth began. Ethan was always composed. He had a way of carrying himself that drew attention without effort. In crowded rooms, people naturally gravitated toward him. When he spoke, even in a whisper, the entire room seemed to lean closer. Claire watched him with a strange fascination, realizing how easily he wore his confidence. It wasn't arrogance, it was precision. Like everything he did was measured, intentional, and entirely under control. Yet behind that composure she sensed a weight he never spoke of. They attended their first gala 2 weeks after signing the contract. The ballroom glittered with chandeliers and champagne, the air heavy with perfume and wealth. Ethan introduced her as his fiancée, his arm wrapped lightly around her waist. She smiled and nodded, playing the part even though her heart was pounding. She felt eyes on her everywhere, curious glances, whispers, the subtle judgment of people who saw through smiles for sport. A few women approached her, their voices dripping with sweetness as they asked how she and Ethan had met. Claire repeated the story his PR manager had written for them. A chance meeting at a charity event, a whirlwind romance, and now an engagement. Ethan never corrected her. He would simply smile at her. That faint, polite smile that didn't quite reach his eyes and squeeze her hand just enough for the cameras to catch. But when the photographers turned away, he'd retreat into silence. On the drive home that night, the car filled with quiet tension. Claire watched him out of the corner of her eye, his gaze fixed out the window, his reflection sharp against the dark glass. She wanted to ask him if he was happy, but she remembered her place. This wasn't real, and she had no right to ask questions that mattered. Still, there were moments that cracked through the surface of their arrangement. Small, fleeting instances that made her forget the contract. One morning she found Ethan sitting at the kitchen table, reading over files with a mug of coffee. Lily, her daughter, had been shy around him at first, hiding behind Claire's legs whenever he was near. But that morning, she wandered into the room wearing her mismatched pajamas and clutching her stuffed rabbit. Ethan looked up startled and then smiled, an unguarded, genuine smile that changed his entire face. He offered her a spoon and the bowl of cereal he had barely touched. Lily climbed onto the chair beside him and began chattering about her favorite cartoons. Claire stood in the doorway, unseen for a moment, watching the man everyone called ruthless laugh softly at her daughter's stories. For the first time, she wondered if there was something in him that went beyond power or control, something human that he didn't let anyone else see. When he caught her watching, he didn't look away. "You didn't tell me she likes chocolate milk," he said quietly. Claire blinked. "I didn't think it mattered." He shrugged lightly. "It does." After that, the house began to feel different. Ethan's presence wasn't as cold as before. He would ask about Lily's schoolwork, leave little notes reminding Claire about appointments, and sometimes even join them for dinner. It wasn't affection, not exactly. It was care disguised as practicality, as if he couldn't admit he was growing attached. But behind every gentle moment was a shadow of unease. One night, Claire was passing by his office when she noticed the door slightly ajar. Inside, Ethan was standing behind his desk staring at a framed photo on the wall. She recognized the woman instantly. Beautiful, dark-haired, smiling at the camera beside Ethan. Before she could step away, He spoke without turning around. She was my fiancée, he said, his voice low and steady. Before the accident, Claire froze. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to intrude. He placed the photo face down on the desk. She died 3 years ago. Car crash on the way to a company retreat. I was supposed to be in the car with her. The room fell silent except for the faint hum of the city outside. Claire didn't know what to say. She wanted to offer comfort, but his posture was rigid, his voice detached. It was clear this was a wound he didn't want to reopen. She simply nodded and slipped away. But the image stayed with her. The way he looked at that photograph, the flicker of grief that escaped before he buried it again. Days turned into weeks, and their fake engagement became a routine that felt dangerously natural. They began finishing each other's sentences during interviews, exchanging knowing glances during events. The tabloids called them the perfect couple, and even Ethan's board seemed pleased. Yet Claire sensed something underneath the calm surface. Ethan was tense more often now, distracted by phone calls that ended abruptly when she entered the room. One evening, while cleaning her desk, she noticed an envelope slipped under her bedroom door. No name, no handwriting, just a plain white envelope. Her stomach tightened as she opened it. Inside was a photocopy of the contract she had signed months ago. A section had been highlighted in red ink. Clause 17, Continuity of Agreement. Her eyes darted over the words. It read that if either party breached the engagement agreement before the 6-month period ended, the custody and financial guardianship of minor dependents would temporarily transfer to Coal Industries until legal resolution. For a moment she couldn't breathe. The paper trembled in her hands. Her mind repeated the words like a curse: custody, guardianship, dependent. They were talking about Lily. Her heart pounded so hard she thought she might faint. Without thinking, she stormed down the hall, the contract clutched in her fist. Ethan was in his office typing something on his laptop when she burst through the door. What the hell is this? She shouted, slamming the paper on his desk. Tell me this isn't what it looks like. He looked up startled, his face draining of color. He glanced at the document, then at her, his jaw tightening. You weren't supposed to see that, he said quietly. Then what is it, Ethan? Did you plan to take my daughter if I quit? Was this your idea of security? His expression hardened, but his voice stayed calm. No, it's not what you think. Then explain it, she demanded, her voice breaking. Because it looks like you own my child. He stood slowly, his eyes softening. That clause wasn't for me, he said. It was for them, the board. They insisted on it. They wanted leverage over both of us. They threatened to go public about the fake engagement unless I gave them a guarantee that neither of us could back out. Claire's hands trembled. So you let them use my daughter? I had no choice, he said, his voice thick with regret. They were going to ruin you before this even began. They would have taken Lily through the courts, claimed you were unfit. I made sure that clause was only enforceable under extreme breach. I was protecting you. Tears stung her eyes. Protecting me? By lying to me? He ran a hand through his hair, the mask of composure slipping. If I told you the truth, you would have walked away and they would have come after you. You have to believe me, Claire, I was trying to keep you safe. She turned away, choking on disbelief and fury. You don't get to decide what's safe for me. You had no right. He stepped closer but didn't touch her. I know, he said quietly. But I couldn't lose control. Not again. That night she packed her things, ready to take Lily and leave. But when she tried to book a ticket, she realized every attempt to access her funds was blocked. Her accounts, all transferred through Coal Industries' security protocols, were frozen. She called the bank, then his assistant, but the responses were the same. Temporary restrictions for verification. She understood then that she was trapped, not by Ethan, but by the machine that surrounded him. The next morning, he waited for her in the kitchen. His eyes looked tired, his voice softer. You're right to be angry, he said. But if you leave now, they'll come for you. They'll take everything, including her. You have to trust me to fix this." Claire stared at him, hating the part of herself that wanted to believe him. He looked like a man fighting his own empire, and for the first time she saw the loneliness in his eyes. He wasn't the villain she wanted him to be. He was trapped too. When she finally spoke, her voice was a whisper. "Then tell me how we end this, Ethan, before it destroys us both." He looked at her, his expression unreadable once more. "We don't end it," he said. "We make it real enough that no one can touch us." And as much as she wanted to run, she knew in her heart that it was already too late to walk away. The days that followed blurred together like a feverish dream. Claire barely slept, her mind running in circles around the same thought. Lily's name written inside that contract. The legal words that could tear her daughter from her arms if anything went wrong. She wanted to believe Ethan's explanation, wanted to think that the clause was just a technical safeguard. But every time she saw his face, the unease twisted deeper. Their home, which had started to feel like a fragile piece, now felt like a gilded cage. Cameras from the press lined the street outside. Reporters shouted questions about the power couple's upcoming wedding. And inside, Claire moved through her days pretending to smile, while fear hollowed her from within. She tried to talk to Ethan again to ask him for reassurance, but he had changed too. He was colder now, more careful. Every word sounded rehearsed. Sometimes she would catch him on late-night calls, his voice low, urgent and laced with something like dread. Once, when she asked who he was talking to, he gave a half-truth that she recognized instantly. "Just business," he said, not meeting her eyes. She didn't press, but the silence between them grew heavier. Lily, oblivious to the tension, continued to play in the living room, making up songs about her new castle and Mr. Ethan, who always made her laugh. And he did still make her laugh even when Claire couldn't. He'd crouch down to her level, fix her toy car, or teach her to fold napkins into swans. But when Lily wasn't looking, his face always fell back into that same haunted stillness. One evening, Claire sat by the fireplace scrolling through her phone. A new headline flashed across the screen. "Rumors surround coal industry's CEO engagement. Sources question authenticity." Her stomach dropped. Someone had found out. She showed the article to Ethan, who read it silently, jaw tight. "It's starting," he murmured. "Starting?" she asked. "The board," he said, setting his phone down. "They're trying to push me out. This engagement was supposed to stabilize the company's image, but they're using it to undermine me instead. They want control back, and they'll use any weakness they can find. And I'm one of those weaknesses," Claire said bitterly. He didn't deny it. "They think if they can expose the engagement as fake, they can void the contract and take Lily into temporary guardianship. They'll call it a breach of agreement." Her breath caught. "They can't do that." "They can," Ethan said grimly. "They wrote the clause themselves." A hollow silence stretched between them, filled only by the faint crackle of the fire. Claire realized then that they were both caught in something far bigger than a lie. She had walked into a deal she thought she understood, but she was just a pawn in a game of power. And Ethan, he was the king under siege, one wrong move away from losing everything. She stood up abruptly, pacing. "We have to end this. You have to let me go. I'll take Lily and disappear. I don't want your money, I just want out." Ethan shook his head, standing as well. "If you go now, they'll spin it as abandonment. They'll paint you as unstable, say you breached the contract. They'll take Lily faster than you can run. I'll go to the press." She snapped. "I'll tell them everything, the contract, the clause, the truth." He stepped closer, his voice low but urgent. "If you do that, they'll destroy you. They have lawyers, politicians, entire networks on their payroll. You won't win, Claire. Not like that." Her anger dissolved into helplessness. So what, we just live this lie forever? No, he said softly. We make them believe it's real until we're strong enough to fight back. She stared at him, trying to read his expression. There was no arrogance in his eyes anymore, no hint of manipulation. Only exhaustion and something that looked almost like regret. That night he kissed her for the first time. It wasn't for the cameras or the public appearances. It happened in the quiet when Lily had gone to bed and the house had fallen into stillness. Claire was standing by the window staring at the rain when Ethan approached. He didn't say anything, just reached out and brushed a strand of hair from her face. His touch was gentle, hesitant, as though he were afraid she might pull away. And then without a word he kissed her. It was slow at first, uncertain. But beneath the restraint was something raw, a kind of loneliness that mirrored her own. When he pulled back, their eyes met, both of them unsure what had just happened. "I'm sorry," he whispered. That wasn't part of the deal. Her heart beat faster. "No," she said quietly. "But maybe it should have been." After that night, everything shifted. The tension between them changed shape, softening into something that neither of them could name but both could feel. They began to trust each other again, if only in fragments. Ethan started telling her more about the board's plans, the threats, the hidden deals, the corruption that stretched through his company like roots in poisoned soil. Claire listened, not as an outsider anymore, but as someone who understood what it meant to lose control of your life. The final month of their agreement arrived faster than either expected. The wedding date was set. At least the public believed so. And the entire company was preparing for the event of the year. But beneath the surface, Ethan was preparing for something else entirely. He had a plan to expose the board, to take back control of his company before they could take Lily. It was during a gala dinner that Claire overheard the truth. She had excused herself to the restroom but paused in the corridor when she heard voices coming from a nearby private room. The door was cracked just enough for her to see a few of Ethan's board members gathered inside, their conversation low and sharp. "She's just a prop," one of them said. "Once Cole resigns, we'll make sure the custody clause is enforced. The child will be placed under corporate guardianship until the matter is resolved. It'll ruin him." Claire's stomach twisted. They weren't bluffing. They meant to take Lily, not for care or safety, but as a weapon. She backed away, heart pounding, and nearly collided with a waiter in the hall. Somehow she managed to compose herself long enough to return to Ethan. When she told him, he didn't look surprised. "Just defeated. I knew they might try," he said softly. "I was hoping they wouldn't. So what do we do now?" He met her gaze with quiet resolve. "We make the lie permanent." The plan was desperate but brilliant. On the night of the shareholders' gala, the same night the board intended to force his resignation, Ethan would publicly announce that he and Claire were already married in secret. With that declaration, their engagement would become legally binding under the company's own public relations ethics, preventing any immediate action against them. Once he had regained control of the company shares, he could dismantle the board and nullify the contract entirely. It was risky, but it was their only chance. Claire agreed, though fear gnawed at her every waking moment. The night of the gala arrived with dazzling lights, photographers, and the hum of expectation. Claire wore a silver gown, her hair curled, her hand trembling in Ethan's as they walked into the ballroom. He squeezed it once reassuringly, but something in his eyes unsettled her. A flicker of unease, a glance toward the corner of the room where one of his security men stood tense, earpiece pressed to his ear. The speeches began, the orchestra played, and Ethan took the stage. He smiled for the crowd, his voice calm as he thanked the guests, the investors, the board. Then, just as planned, he began the announcement. "Tonight," he said, glancing toward her, "I want to share something personal. Claire and I—" He stopped mid-sentence as a man in a dark suit stepped up to the stage and whispered something in his ear. For a moment, Ethan didn't move. Then his face went pale, his entire composure crumbling in front of hundreds of eyes. He turned toward her, his voice shaking as he spoke her name. "Claire," he said urgently. "They took Lily." The words sliced through the room like glass. Claire's heart stopped. The music faltered. The lights blurred. For a second she couldn't comprehend what he had said, but the look in his eyes told her it was real. The board had made their move. Everything after that happened in fragments. Ethan grabbed her hand and led her out of the ballroom, ignoring the cameras, the confused shouts. Outside, his driver was already waiting. The car sped through the city streets as he barked orders into his phone, his voice sharp with fury. Claire sat beside him, shaking, trying not to break down. All she could think about was Lily, her little girl's soft laugh, the way she hugged her stuffed rabbit at night. When Ethan hung up, his jaw was set. "I know where they took her," he said, "and I'm going to get her back." Claire didn't ask how he knew. She didn't care. All she knew was that she couldn't lose her daughter, not to a corporation, not to anyone. For the first time since the beginning, they weren't pretending anymore. They were partners, bound not by a contract but by desperation. And as the car disappeared into the dark, Claire realized that the lie that had once trapped them might be the only thing that could save them both. The night air was cold, sharp enough to sting as the black car sped through the outskirts of the city. Claire's hands trembled in her lap, her knuckles white from gripping the edge of her dress. Her mind raced with terror and disbelief. Lily was gone. Somewhere out there, her little girl was being held by men who saw her as nothing more than leverage in a corporate war. Ethan sat beside her, his expression carved in stone, one hand clenched around his phone, the other resting on his knee, unmoving. Every few seconds he checked the tracker on his screen, a tiny blinking dot moving along the map. "She's in a private estate," he said, his voice low but shaking slightly. "Belongs to one of the board members. They thought I wouldn't come after her myself." Claire turned toward him, eyes wild. "And what if they hurt her?" "She's 6, Ethan. She's just a little girl." "They won't," he said, though his voice cracked. "They just want me to surrender control of the company. They think I'll fold if they threaten you and Lily. But they're wrong." The car stopped at the edge of a long private drive. The mansion loomed ahead, its windows glowing faintly against the darkness. Security lights swept across the yard. It looked less like a home and more like a fortress. Ethan reached under the seat, pulling out a small black case. Inside were a pair of earpieces and 2 compact devices that looked like car remotes. Claire's breath hitched. "What is that?" "Blinders," he said. "They jam the signal to the security cameras for about 2 minutes. Long enough to get us inside." "Us," she whispered. He met her gaze. "I'm not leaving you here." She wanted to argue, to tell him this was madness, but the thought of Lily trapped inside silenced her. Fear gave way to a strange, fierce determination. She took one of the earpieces, placed it in her ear, and nodded. "Let's go." They moved quickly through the shadows, crouching low behind the hedges as Ethan deactivated the perimeter sensors. Every sound felt magnified, the rustle of leaves, the hum of the distant generator, the pounding of her own heart. When they reached the side door, Ethan pressed the blinder. The lights above flickered once, then dimmed. He opened the door quietly, motioning for her to follow. Inside, the air smelled of polish and power. The marble floors gleamed under the faint security lighting. Claire could hear voices somewhere deeper in the house, men talking in low tones. They slipped down a corridor, Ethan leading her with practiced precision. He moved like a man who had done this before, every step measured. Claire didn't want to think about what kind of life had taught him that. When they reached the second floor, Ethan signaled for her to stay behind a pillar while he checked ahead. Moments later, he returned, his eyes dark with relief. "She's here," he whispered. End of the hall. Claire's pulse thundered as they crept forward. She could see a door slightly ajar, and through it the faint glow of a nightlight. She pushed the door open and froze. Lily was there, sitting on a couch, clutching her stuffed rabbit. Her eyes widened when she saw them. "Mommy!" she cried, her little legs scrambling to run forward. Claire dropped to her knees, pulling her daughter into her arms, tears spilling down her cheeks. "It's okay, baby," she whispered, kissing her hair over and over. "I've got you. You're safe now." But before they could leave, a voice echoed from behind them. "Touching reunion," it said coolly. "But it ends here." Ethan turned, his body shifting in front of Claire instinctively. In the doorway stood one of his board members, a man named Richard Vale, a tall, gray-haired executive with eyes like cold steel. 2 security guards flanked him, both armed. "Cole," Vale said, smiling thinly, "you should have just signed the papers. You brought this on yourself." "You kidnapped a child," Ethan said, his voice deadly calm. "That's not business, that's criminal." Vale shrugged. "You always thought the company was yours alone. It never was. You were a temporary face for something much bigger. You could have stepped aside quietly. Now you'll lose everything." Ethan took a slow step forward. "No, Richard. You're going to lose." In a blur, he pressed the second blinder device. A piercing static filled the air, followed by the sudden blackout of lights. Shouts erupted as the guards fumbled in the dark. Ethan grabbed Claire's hand and pulled her into the hall. She clutched Lily tightly, barely able to see as they ran down the staircase, guided only by the faint emergency glow strips on the floor. Gunfire cracked behind them. Claire screamed, ducking instinctively as the sound echoed through the marble. Ethan shoved open a side door and they burst out into the cold night. He pressed a button on his key fob, and the black car roared to life from across the drive, headlights flaring. They sprinted toward it as another gunshot rang out, splintering the gravel near their feet. Ethan yanked the door open, pushed Claire and Lily inside, and jumped behind the wheel. The tires screeched as they sped down the road, bullets sparking against the car's rear bumper. Then finally silence. Claire held Lily close, shaking uncontrollably. "It's okay," she whispered, though her voice trembled. "It's okay, sweetheart." Ethan's hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. "We're not going home," he said. "Not yet." They drove for nearly an hour, weaving through back roads until they reached the edge of a remote coastal town. There, Ethan pulled into a quiet motel, the kind of place where no one asked questions. Once inside the small room, he locked the door and finally exhaled, running a hand through his hair. Claire tucked Lily into the bed, her little girl already half asleep from exhaustion. Then she turned to Ethan, who was sitting at the table staring blankly at his phone. "What now?" she asked softly. "I sent the files," he said without looking up. "Everything the board did. The bribes, the falsified reports, the illegal contracts. I've been collecting evidence for months. If anything happened to you or Lily, I had it set to release automatically." "You had this planned," she whispered. "I had contingencies," he said, "but I never thought they'd go this far." She watched him for a moment, then sat across from him. "Ethan, when this is over, what happens to us?" He looked at her, and for the first time the hard CEO veneer cracked. "I don't know," he admitted. "I built my entire life around control, and then you showed up and suddenly nothing made sense anymore. I didn't hire you because I needed a fake fiancé. I hired you because I was drowning and I didn't even know it." Claire's eyes softened. "You didn't have to save me with money. You just had to be honest." "I know," he said quietly, "and I will be. From now on." The next morning, the world exploded with news. Every major outlet carried the story. Corporate corruption, insider fraud, kidnapping charges. Ethan's evidence had gone public, and Richard Vale was arrested before noon. The custody clause was voided, and the contract that had bound Claire to a nightmare was finally destroyed. In the weeks that followed, Ethan stepped down from his position as CEO, selling off his shares and donating most of his earnings to charities supporting single mothers and children. It shocked the business world, but to Claire it made perfect sense. He had spent years building an empire on lies. Now he wanted to build something real. They moved quietly to a small house by the coast. Lily started at a new school, her laughter filling the rooms again. Claire took a part-time job at a local bookstore, finding peace in the simplicity of ordinary days. Ethan visited often, helping with homework, cooking dinner, staying later each time until visiting blurred into living there. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, he joined Claire on the porch, watching Lily chase fireflies in the yard. The golden light caught his face, softer now, freer. "She's happy," he said. "She's safe," Claire replied. He nodded, then turned to her. "Claire, I never thought I'd get another chance to do things right. But I want one with you. No contracts, no money, no lies." Her eyes met his, and she saw the truth in them. After everything, the fear, the deception, the pain, what was left between them was something real, something born not from a deal, but from survival and trust. She smiled faintly. "You already have one." He leaned closer, their foreheads touching as Lily's laughter drifted through the air. For the first time in a long time, the world felt still. The storms that had defined their lives had passed, leaving something fragile but beautiful in their wake. Love wasn't what they had expected. It wasn't glamorous or scripted or perfect. It was messy and human and painfully real. But it was theirs, and this time it came with no secret clauses.